Mega Man 5, or V as I like to call it to differentiate it from the NES title of the same name, don't worry, I'll call it 5 for the rest of this review, it has a legacy of being the Mega Man game for the Game Boy, despite it being pretty rare nowadays, indicating sales may not have been up to snuff for the handheld's greater hits. The internet has given this game a moderately successful life after death, whether it be from the re-release on 3DS or, like a lot of people, sailing the 7 seas if you know what I mean. Arrgh. Many people call 5 Game Boy the best classic Mega Man game you never played, citing how everything is completely original compared to its predecessors on the Game Boy. No longer are there recycled robot masters and levels from the NES games. No, it's all brand new and all different, and that can be pretty exciting for those who crave a new classic Mega Man experience, with the exception of 4 returning bosses from the Game Boy games, but have patience, we'll discuss them when we get to it. Welcome to the 5th part of the classic Mega Man handheld retrospective. This very game was the reason why I did this entire retrospective. I mean, I wanted to talk about the first 4 games, but not as much as I wanted to talk about 5. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the one, the only, Mega Man V. I'm just gonna call it 5 Game Boy. Y'all know what I mean. I wouldn't feel right calling it V. So why did Capcom finally give Minakuchi Engineering so much creative leeway with this entry? Well, according to Kaiji Inafune, all that was left were 6's Robot Masters, and rather than just have the remainder of 5 NES's Robot Masters and 4 from Mega Man 6 be the basis of this game, Inafune decided that it was time the team create something completely new from scratch. He also stated it took the most amount of time to make of all the Rockman World titles. I mean, just by looking at the Rockman World 5 section of the art book, Mega Man Official Works, it just goes to show that he had to draw brand new enemies, brand new Robot Master-like stand-ins, and while they all follow a common theme of space, it's still not as easy as giving permission to use the NES designs while only making a few new enemies like past games did. Other than that, I don't know much about what happened behind the scenes from the programming side, but he did state that they had a lot of fun making this entry, as well as the side series as a whole, so that doesn't sound like the colossal stress fest that was developing Mega Man 3 for the NES. With all that said, it came out on September 10th, 1994 on the Game Boy, and I'm honestly not sure why it's rare. I can't really find any sales figures, and given it's pricey online, it either didn't sell that well or they didn't make many copies of it. It also never got a reprint despite 1994 being a year that the Game Boy still had a lot of steam in terms of sales. It's honestly a bit of a video game history enigma, but what we do know by analyzing the release date of each classic series entry is that this is technically the very last 8-bit classic Mega Man game for 14 years. But enough about the history, we all know what we came here to see, and that's to see why Mega Man 5 Game Boy is so hyped up by the fanbase. It's not just the original ideas, because it takes more than original ideas to make a great game after all. Take Mega Man X7 for example. I know that's a dead horse, but that game was completely original, and look how that trashterpiece turned out. All Mega Man games usually have a story of some sort, but with the classic series, it seems like once in a blue moon we get one that's even satisfactory. If it ends up disappointing in some area, it's not the end of the world and doesn't take away much from the core quality of the game itself because it's such a small part of it. But knowing why you're where you are, what the destination is, and what the journey means to you are integral parts of video game storytelling, and it can definitely leave a lasting impact if done effectively. And I'm happy to say that having played through the majority of the classic series, Mega Man 5 Game Boy story presentation is by far the best I've seen in the series. It starts off with a brief recap that's kind of inaccurate because it states that the world is at peace after Dr. Wily's 4th attempt at world domination has failed. I mean, I can understand it's referencing only the previous 4 Game Boy games, but I do recall their story segments in the previous games manuals referencing how Dr. Wily has failed before many times, and they even reference how the recycled Robot Masters have been used before. So, those weren't an attempt at world domination? I guess continuity was never the series' strong suit. And sure, one could say this is an alternate reality, but then why would the Mega Man killer show up in Mega Man 10's DLC? Is that also an alternate reality separate from a main campaign? Not to mention how in Mega Man 4 Game Boy, Proto Man does show up with no introduction and gives you helpful items, expecting players to have known him before in the NES games. Like, assuming he's no longer working for Wily and therefore not attacking like he did in 3 NES, did their encounter in 3 NES never happen, or was he always a good guy in this universe? It just begs the question as to whether this is a series of semi-sequels to the NES games or just their own thing. Mind you, the first game in the side series is Dr. Wily's Revenge. Aside from that confusing bit of continuity, the world has forgotten about Dr. Wily. Because getting your city blown up by 4 robot masters is just something you forget about, clearly. But I like how it pans down to Earth only to see a shooting star heads towards it, foreshadowing something. Because a few months later, when Rock and his sister Roll are just walking around a grassy valley, they are attacked by a star droid named Terra, who apparently has heard of Mega Man. Roll runs off and Terra fires a shot that Mega Man jumps over. Jeez, what did that hit Roll off screen? But Mega Man tries to fire back with a few regular shots and then a charge shot, only for that to bounce off Terra, and suffice to say, he gets his metal ass handed to him and is knocked unconscious. And this really establishes how powerful this new threat is. I mean, these shots took out robot masters and giant mechanical monstrosities in the past, but with them being bounced off just like that, it builds up Terra as a legitimate threat to Earth, since not only can he not be defeated easily, he wants to make Mega Man his slave, adding some personal stakes into the story as well. And this unstoppable appearance is further supported when he and his star droids dominate the world in only a few mere hours. But regardless, Mega Man wakes up in Dr. Light's lab. He equips him with a new Mega Arm in hopes of standing a chance against the invading star droids. I like how a newly introduced game mechanic is heavily contextualized in the intro because it shows the desperation of Mega Man and Light when the old Charge Buster didn't do anything to Terra. It gives this weapon an only hope kind of feeling, and it's no longer just, hey, because this is a new game, here's a new thing that I've been working on, enjoy this gimmick. No, it actually has a reason behind its creation in-game. Light even further elaborates that the star droids are made of alien material, rendering Earth's weapons outright useless against them, and his analysis on that material was the reason the Mega Arm would work on them. But besides that awesome introduction, this game has a really cool journey ahead where the first star droids are fought on Earth, but once they're defeated, Terra is now enraged that Mega Man survived and destroyed them, and then summons Dark Moon to fight Mega Man. But after that, Dr. Light discovers why the star droids were on Earth. They're using its resources to make an even more powerful army of robots with plans to launch an all-out attack. But Mega Man suggests they strike before that happens, so Light enables Rush for spaceflight, even giving him a charge shot for later, and after Mega Man takes out the second set of robot masters on Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Pluto, he has a rematch with Terra where he reveals he wanted to make a world for all robots, and surprise surprise, he also reveals that he's not the mastermind, since he apparently has a master he reports to. But before we reveal who that is, I'll be taking some bets now. Alright, gentlemen in the back row, we got King the Robot from Mega Man and Base. He's making his handheld debut for $50. Alright. Oh, it looks like everybody's betting Dr. Wily is, including the person behind the screen, for $300. We'll see how that turns out. Terra made a pretty decent secondary antagonist, kind of like Ballad, but unlike Ballad, he doesn't try to redeem himself out of nowhere and is built for the battle and stays that way. But when he summons Dark Moon and mentions his fear of facing his master, he comes off as a cowardly right-hand man who may start off intimidating, but when I finally saw him explode, I got a sense of satisfaction like, haha, I'll see you in the scrapyard below. But with that 9th star droid defeated, it's unsurprisingly revealed that Dr. Wily was behind this the whole time as his Death Skull, I guess. It shows up in orbit, so after nearly escaping the blast, Mega Man rides Rush Space into Dr. Wily's new space fortress that is totally not a ripoff of the Death Star from Star Wars. I'm not gonna lie that on my first playthrough, I was half expecting Wily to be the true mastermind, since despite the intro bringing in a new villain to presumably take over the antagonistic role, Mega Man 4 NES did this only to reveal that the villain was working under Dr. Wily, and when 5 and 6 tried to do similar plot twists, only 5's fooled me, and 6 just practically gave up on concealing the plot twists. It's not necessarily the game's fault for not outsmarting me as a player, but later on, this game did throw something unexpected to make up for this reveal. Dr. Wily, instead of doing the cliche begging for mercy and then escaping, he summons the ultimate star droid named Sunstar. But get this, Dr. Wily, for the first time in the classic series, is not the final boss. And one of the only times as well. The only other time I can honestly think of where he's not the final boss in a classic Mega Man game is Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the Future for the Wonder Swan.
Leave it to Alec to reference some obscure shit no one cares about.
Hey, I'm just trying to make an insightful observation no one else made before. It's hard to be original on the internet. Anyways, Sunstar hilariously shoots Dr. Wily's craft and he just flees off screen. But after a really hectic battle, Sunstar is damaged, but Mega Man, being the virtuous hero, wants to take him back to Dr. Light's lab to repair him, leaving Sunstar confused. I really like this scene because while it is somewhat of a repeat of Ballad's quote-unquote redemption arc in Mega Man 4 Game Boy, the difference is, Sunstar isn't asking for help and is curious as to why a machine meant for killing would help another machine meant for killing. He goes from a doomsday weapon aware of his purpose to potentially destroy all supposed inferior life forms, to presumably acknowledging his fate and honorably tells Mega Man to escape since his fusion reactor will destroy the entire fortress with him, even mentioning how he'll never see the envisioned day where humanity and robots would coexist in peace. I just really appreciate the moment because Mega Man's philosophy is something that is further emphasized in the Mega Man X series, so it's nice to see something like this originate with the classic Mega Man timeline. I mean, X1 did come out in Japan in 1993, so maybe Minakuchi Engineering made the story this way out of inspiration from X1, or possibly look back at 1990s Mega Man 3's famous ending that started to bring Mega Man's more vulnerable side out to the player, since it tells the player that he's not just some lifeless mechanical assassin that you would have thought he was from the outside looking in. But that's not all there is to the ending, because after Mega Man and Rush Space escape out of the Death Skull, yeah, I'm still calling it that, we get to see Mega Man returning to the grassy area all alone as the boss names roll by on screen. But this does leave me with a lingering question on my mind. Whatever happened to Wily after the fortress blew up? Well, of course he escaped in a hilariously beat up hovercraft. He threatens to destroy Mega Man once and for all, only for his hovercraft to finally break apart, and as expected, he's begging for mercy and runs off, and Mega Man of course pursues him. You know, that's just great visual humor, and a great variation of the tired gag of him begging for mercy at the end of the game. So props to this scene for subverting that common Mega Man trope. So yeah. While the story knows when to be business as usual, it also knows what details to fill the player in. It knows how to contextualize where we are and why we're doing what we're doing. And as the ending has shown, it knows when to be funny and poke fun at our expectations. This is honestly why I believe this is the best story in the entirety of the classic Mega Man series, because unlike the other Mega Man stories I have praised, I'm honestly hard pressed to find anything to complain about with this entry. In fact, I didn't even have to open up the manual to answer any lingering questions I had, so that's a first for the Game Boy series. But as for the actual gameplay, I'm not gonna say it's the perfection of the classic Mega Man formula or anything like that. However, I will say it's one of the more ideal classic Mega Man experiences. The Charge Buster introduced in Mega Man 4 NES has been a mostly celebrated addition to the franchise, and since its inception, it has been tweaked with each new installment, and 5 Game Boy is no exception. Gone is the recoil from Mega Man 4 Game Boy. I mean, I never really hated it, if I'm being honest, but I don't exactly miss it either because it added nothing to the game. But instead of a charge shot being an actual shot, it's now Mega Man's fist being shot out of his arm with the charge to do some damage. And honestly, I have no objections to it as it is, because the enemies throughout the levels seem to be designed around it, whereas bigger enemies would encourage the use of it, but smaller enemies can be taken out with the regular Buster weapon. I do like how it has a boomerang-like function, whereas the fist returns to you, and the longer you hold the charge button, the further the fist will travel, which will be useful depending on whether you buy the upgrades at Light Shop or not, because things only get interesting when you buy the modifications. Oh, speaking of which, the shop system is back, and it functions as it did in the previous game. Collect P-chips and exchange them for helpful E-tanks, mini E-tanks, W-tanks, S-tanks. It depends on what you think you'll need in each level, and it just makes the journey all the more accessible for new players, especially for those who have that one level they just keep getting stuck on and could use a stock of E-tanks. But I personally tend to save up for the energy balancer that's also in the game because, again, distributing collected weapon energy to the lowest power weapon without pausing, that is just a convenience I can no longer go without. But now we have two new things in the shop, and they are the Mega Arm modifications. MH is really awesome and should most definitely be the first modification you get because it allows for the Mega Arm to grab items that are stuck behind solid objects, but it also can be used to grab things from a rather risky area that you just don't exactly want to jump in. But unfortunately, CL is the weaker of the two upgrades I found because it basically grabs onto enemies, and if you hold B or tap it after contacting an enemy with a fist, it'll stick to the enemy for a few seconds and deal more damage than with the normal Mega Arm attack. It theoretically sounds great, right? Yeah, when it wants to work, because for some enemies it just won't latch onto them at all, or maybe it won't grab onto the enemy despite you doing the exact button inputs. It isn't the end of the world if it doesn't latch on, but sometimes it just feels less practical than it should be. So as for the Mega Arm as a whole, I like how it functions and how its functions can be expanded upon with optional upgrades, and not only that, but if you get 3 game overs, the Mega Arm will be upgraded to pack even more of a punch to help out the less skilled players out there. I mean, like last time, it's gone once you turn off the game, but it's still good to see that this adaptive difficulty feature from 4 Game Boy was carried over to 5. That's really the only new core mechanic there is to mention because everything else about Mega Man 5 is original, but the core mechanics from previous entries are pretty much still there, or refined at least. But when I say that the levels are original, I mean they're completely original, creative, and very well designed on their own, and here's why. First, the 4x4 level select where we fight 4 Robot Masters, then fight a mid-game boss, and then fight the rest of the Robot Masters, that method of progression is still the same, but while most Mega Man games have a weakness order chain, this one has to be the weirdest of the 5 Game Boy games, since at times it just abandons the idea of using weapons you acquire, then take out the next boss, then use that boss's weapon to take out the next one, and so on and so on. Like, I don't mind that some bosses have more than one weakness, in fact I encourage that, but to illustrate this point further, it's recommended to fight Mercury first, get its weapon, then fight Neptune, but logically, Neptune should be weak to Mercury's weapon, right? But no. For whatever reason, these first 2 bosses are best fought with a Mega Arm instead of a particular weapon, and the boss that is weak to Mercury's weapon, being Pluto, doesn't show up until the second half of the game. Why couldn't Mercury or Neptune be weak to one of the other weapons? That's how a Mega Man weakness chain is supposed to work. But Mars, he's weak to Neptune's weapon, and then Venus is weak to Mars's weapon. The rest of the first half of the Robot Master stages is standard Mega Man fare, and I'll be more lenient with the second half, as I do like that some bosses have more than one weakness, making it easier to choose the next starter, but the weakness chain is so off. Especially with Neptune and Mercury having their weaknesses not be acquired until the second half of the game, long after they're defeated. Like, you can only use their weaknesses against them during the boss rush. This is probably the most flawed aspect of 5 Game Boy, but it's far from the end of the world, since whether you fight them with or without their weaknesses, they can still be really fun boss battles. But it did throw me off a bit, mainly because I had these streamlined weakness chain expectations, and it's not like Minakuchi Engineering doesn't have experience in creating a weakness chain. They had to invent a new one after one game set of Robot Masters were defeated, and you had to go on to the next game's set of bosses. But despite all that, any of these first 4 stages are great to start out on, but you know how I said that the previous game had a stronger first half and a weaker second half? Well, I feel the opposite is true for Mega Man 5 Game Boy, as the first 4 levels feel very similar in the regard that they take place or will eventually take place inside an enemy-infested industrialized area. Like Mercury and Mars' levels, for example, they both have quite a bit of instant kill spikes spread throughout the level, with some being optional challenges for goodies such as E-tanks and weapon energy. All that's really unique to their stages is Mercury's conveyor belt platforms that switch left and right every few seconds, and it feels like a mix of Metal Man and Dust Man stages from the NES games, where it's like a scrapyard complete with falling canisters serving as obstacles, and even a crusher section that goes up and down, and you have to be real quick to get to the safe sections of it. Not to mention that there's 2 enemy types that use Dustman-like projectiles as their main weaponry. Don't get me wrong, just because it's my least favorite stage of the Star Droid levels doesn't mean I don't like it. I think it's quite good thanks to these obstacles mentioned beforehand, in combination with these saw blade enemies, whereas if you kill them, their saws can still damage you, but you have the option to avoid it or jump over it. Like, that is just a nice break from the usual see enemy, shoot it, and move on trope. Mars' level, however, has a more combat-oriented focus than Mercury's level, with all these types of smaller enemies like the shell-spinning turtle robot or these hopping missile dudes. But besides that, the only platforming challenges that are unique are these rocket platforms that, if you're standing on one for too long, will send you to instant kill spikes, and there are landmines spread throughout that detonate after being stepped on, which just goes to show how the level is war-themed, akin to something like Napalm Man stage in Mega Man 5 NES, more or less. It makes a lot of sense because Mars is the Roman god of war, and, you know, with all the landmines and missiles throughout the level, that's pretty clever. It's not even the first time this happened in the series, nor even the year this game came out for the North American region. And of course I take that's what Neptune's stage tries to do, since its namesake was a god of the sea, and the stage features water as an obstacle and you're on a submarine. But back to the stage itself, I like how it starts off on top of a boat or submarine that goes up and down, making combat more challenging, especially against these helicopter dudes. And once you actually get into the submarine, these steam pipes and water pipes will make or break how smooth this trek goes, because one thing I really like is how if your weapon hits a cracked pipe, it releases slippery water that tries to drag you into a bottomless pit if you're not careful. But if you're actually mindful and don't go busters a-blazing, you're rewarded with having a significantly easier time. But I will say it can be really difficult not to hit them when there's these goddamn flying enemies. There's also these time-cracked steam pipes that kind of remind me of the elect beams from Elect Man's stage in terms of timing and very precise hitboxes, meaning having just one pixel touching it while climbing a ladder will send you all the way down a few screens. I do appreciate the variety in obstacles, whereas even portions of the level that are underwater with instant kill spikes, meaning you have to be very careful with how you proceed, kind of like 4 NES or Mega Man 3 for the Game Boy, except much shorter than those, thankfully. Honestly, the variety of the fair challenges in this level is what makes it my favorite of the first 4 stages. Almost all of them have a purpose to them, and they somehow make the level flow seamlessly. Not that Venus's level doesn't. I really like this stage quite a bit too. It always kind of creeped me out though, with these gelatinous enemies that drop from the ceiling, and just even these benign blobs would make me want to tread carefully. But also unique to these levels are these waterfalls that pretty much turn any surface it touches into a bottomless pit, and does that every few seconds. And I like how the level design eases you into it so that by the time the placement gets very complex, you're more than ready to take it on, even though there were a few careless miscalculations on my part where I died due to it. But it's still a clever implemented hazard nonetheless. And can I just say, I love jumping on these bubbles where it's the big ones let you bounce higher, where the little ones just give you a little bounce. Making you strategize how you get past enemies and spikes with the environmental condition, it's just exhilarating. The only thing in this level that kind of annoys me are these bat enemies that are like those fan enemies from Mega Man 6, whereas they suck you in and blow you away every few seconds, but maybe it's because of the more compact level design that getting past them feels more like relief than satisfaction. I never really died because of them, but there were still times they blew me down a screen, and you don't have any screen nuke or long range weapons at this point in the game, at least not until the second half. But after beating these 4 levels, like the previous game before, we unlock a mid-level, but rather than have some minor obstacles to face before a boss battle, it just goes straight to the boss battle after a cutscene with Terra. So after fighting Dark Moon, which he summons, we take the battle from Earth to the second half of the solar system, and as I said before, these 4 levels I enjoy way more than the previous 4, and it's probably better that it was ordered that way because, well, save the best for last? But scientific nitpick alert, how exactly do these levels in any comprehension of science could possibly exist? I mean, sure, by the mid-90s, it's generally understood that Jupiter, Saturn, and Uranus are gas giants and not just terrestrial planets. In other words, there's nothing to stand on. Pluto, I can understand having solid ground, but like, are these levels each on their own moons? The icon kind of indicates that the levels take place in the center of these planets. Maybe it's like the Forerunner gas mine in Halo 2 that was just floating in the atmosphere of the gas giant Threshold.
Oh my god. Nobody cares about the science.
Hey, I'm just making an observation. Is that a crime?
Oh, you're just making an observation. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sidequestian gentleman, for enlightening me on details that's very inconsequential and not worthy of my time.
Wow. Alright, get off the set.
Okay, don't say I didn't warn you.
Regardless of scientific accuracy, I don't think this game gives a These 4 levels are a fun romp from start to finish. While the first 4 had a metallic interior setting in common, these next 4, well, at least 2 out of 4 of them incorporate the outer space setting in some way. As for the others, while Saturn's level, which while does have a metallic sci-fi interior, it looks all dilapidated, and Pluto's interior is more like an underground sci-fi mine. I guess because Pluto is the Roman god of the underworld? Out of these last 4 Star Droid stages, Jupiter is my favorite stage because when it's outside, it has a lower gravitational attraction that just allows for a variety of interesting combat scenarios, like against airborne enemies or these Sniper Joe enemies that I like to call Cosmic Joes, since the real name I can't even pronounce. But this level also progresses into an ice-based level, you know, because space is real cold, and just makes platforming a lot more challenging than it has to be. It's just a nice variety to have this in combination with lower gravity gimmicks. Saturn's level is also great since most of it is comprised of these gravity gimmicks, whereas the upward moving arrows indicate a lesser gravitational attraction, while the downwards moving arrows indicate a higher one. This may be all the level has going for it, but with all the enemies such as these cloud dudes that slow time down, and the instant kill hazards like the bombless pits and the spikes, it's just a really fun level that, like Jupiter's level, is more platforming focused than it is focused on combat. Of course, if you prefer the combat-oriented levels with some good platforming included occasionally, then Uranus's level should satisfy those needs. Like, this level is more reminiscent of an ancient Egypt setting, with these turning platforms that once stood on for too long will send you underneath, which is utilized quite well throughout the level. But there's also these left and right moving platforms with spikes on the sidewalls that kind of rip off that Mega Man 3 NES obstacle. And if that wasn't enough, the real star of this level are these T-Common mini-bosses that have a vulnerable weak spot on top, so you actually have to use its attack, being these platforms it spits out, to reach that higher point, cleverly merging good platforming with the combat. And can I just say how much I love that death animation? Oh, and this stage reminds me, Eddie the item lottery robot is back for 2 levels, and because I can't do the ladder trick in either of them, I usually get the item I don't want, but thanks anyways, I guess? Yeah, Pro Man and 4 Game Boy and 5 Game Boy kind of put Eddie out of a job. But the weakest stage of the second half of the game has to be Pluto's stage, because while it is pretty fun all around, all there really is to it are these falling platforms that serve as both a hazard and a platform for the player to use. I mean, it's all well arranged, especially in combination with the airborne enemies that drop sparks, but the platforming, combat scenarios, and gimmicks just don't captivate me the same way other stages in the game did. But hey, we get a surprise appearance by Proto Man for moral support. I guess that's something. But now, after the Wily stages after beating Terra, we pretty much enter a space shooter level, avoiding asteroids, fighting enemy spaceships, and that basic stuff. The last part admittedly annoys me because of the laser beams that shoot out. You have to have extremely quick reaction time or say goodbye to a good chunk of your health. I did however discover Rich had this quick turn, which by pressing A while pressing up or down, you can actually jerk Space Rush into that direction, making the laser's hits more dodgeable, but they still come in way too fast to have an adequate reaction time. And it's not like you'll know when they come in until it's too late or you died and memorized the patterns. That is kind of annoying, but given how short this level is, it's not the end of the world, especially since the Skull Blazer boss at the end is very easy. The final actual platforming level is like the previous 2 final levels. Most of the enemies and obstacles you dealt with in previous levels are back in some form, and what I said about those applies here as well, so there's nothing more to talk about. But one thing worth noting is is the non-linear nature of this level, where you can actually use some of the weapons you acquire to go in one route, or use the ladders to go a different route. It's all up to you, and admittedly I was not the most keen on these free-falling sections, since while you can control Mega Man when he's free-falling, it can sometimes be easy to careen into spikes you didn't see coming, or miss a passage because you entered one screen from too far. I really do like the inclusion of these secret rooms because of them having Proto Man giving you items like S-Tanks, and given how this is the longest level in the game, every little bit helps. It just makes this level feel more climactic, where the situation is so dire, Proto Man is stepping in to help you several times. Like, this is it! This is the last chapter of the Mega Man Game Boy series, period. The end. This level's most talked about on forums for having a Mega Man X1 styled boss rush, but instead of star droids, you fight the 4 Mega Man killers you defeated in the previous games, which is a really nice callback. But as to how Anchor, Punk, and Ballad could have possibly survived is beyond me, but we did see Quint escape in Mega Man 2 Game Boy, and Ballad did show up one last time after being blown up in the second encounter in 4 Game Boy, so maybe these killers are like Solomon Grundy from the Batman comics? I don't know. Also, didn't Ballad redeem himself in the last game? Why is he fighting Mega Man after learning the error of his ways? But after this level, we get the Star Droid boss rush and then the final bosses of the game. I don't really have much of an opinion on the boss rush other than I enjoyed fighting the Star Droids before, and actually taking them out again wasn't the worst thing in the world for me. But it is repeated content, which is technically padding, but at least I get to fight a few of them with weapons I didn't have before previously. So with that said, Mega Man 5 Game Boy's level design is really superb. Like, I could not name one level I thought was poorly designed. But as for the boss designs of these stages, I like most of the Star Droids, but not all of them. Here's why. Despite the weakness chain being out of whack in this installment, these 8 Star Droids are actually quite good, albeit a little on the easy side. Most of these Star Droids can be defeated with either the Mega Arm or their weaknesses by recognizing their patterns and dodging their variety of attacks. Like, I found Mercury and Neptune to be a lot of fun to face, even though you just have to jump over the Mercury blobs before they rejoin them, or in Neptune's case, avoid the water droplets from the ceiling when they shake it up. Their weaknesses tend to make the battle so much shorter, but still a good time regardless. Same could be said for Mars, although the problem with this boss is that if you do use their weakness against them, you can't destroy their bullet attack with the salt water unless you pause, equip the buster, shoot them, then pause again and re-equip the salt water. But honestly, who wants to do that? I sure as hell don't. You can still slide under their missiles and use the salt water to destroy their mines, which is cool, but that is a little bit flawed in execution, meaning you'll probably have more fun using the Mega Arm throughout the entire battle. And as for Venus, they're really easy since they're one of those jumping bosses that you just have to avoid touch damage from, in addition to their bubble attack. The fight is pretty fun, but timing their jumps so they land on the photon missiles, that just makes this boss fight easy and over with before you know it. I do like that the second half of the game made these bosses more challenging than the first half though. I mean, Jupiter's deadly lightning attack is easy to dodge if you coax them into following you towards the edge of the battleground, and just when they're about to attack, you can dodge them. But I will give them credit for making a Mega Arm only battle tricky, since there's a small window of time for when they're about to die before going back to hovering. But I think that Saturn might just be my favorite Star Droid of the 8 because they're really tricky. Like, it's possible to jump over their slide attack, and some may say they're too quick, but there is a bit of a tell when they're about to throw their ring. Their pellet attack is a bit tricky to dodge, but that also has a tell for when they jump in the air. But their black hole attack is awesome since you have to resist the pull of it, and the funny thing is, when you shoot the Mega Arm, when they're doing that, for a few seconds, Mega Man will be running without an arm. Like, that's some disturbing imagery right there. But I really admire the design that went behind this boss battle. I've been craving something that's fair, but also the fight for your life. Although they're significantly easier with the electric shock. And Pluto is a lot of fun to fight against because they have 2 weaknesses instead of 1. But man, with their projectiles, their spark ground attack, their wall jump, and their tail beam attack, they're a tricky boss with a Mega Arm. Not impossible at all, don't get me wrong, but their beam attack that moves in a slight arc can be tricky as hell to avoid. But I like how on the ground the Grab Buster is the best weapon to use against them, but while on the walls the Bubble Bomb is the best weapon to use against them. They're kind of like a house cat. They can be a real pain to deal with, but there are options available to make dealing with them easier. I mean, if I had $1 for every time my cat jumped on the walls and shot lasers at me with his tail, well, I'd have enough money to buy that $100 cat condo that he always wanted. As for Uranus, their reputation precedes them, for I've seen the top 10 worst classic Mega Man boss lists, and Uranus was a frequent mainstay there, and who can honestly blame the list makers for putting them on those lists? For one, you're better off fighting them with the Mega Arm instead of the Break Dash, because after using it, you'll probably take touch damage from them given their large hitbox, and they often shake the ground and sometimes cause the floor and ceiling to cave in, being an instant kill hazard, mind you. But I think the worst part is not being able to know when a hop would actually be a jump to the other side, which would cause touch damage if you don't slide under, but because they quickly throw blocks at you, sometimes you might slide into the opening. And while I personally wouldn't put them in the top 10 worst classic Mega Man bosses, as I can think of worse ones to fight, they are by far the worst boss in this game. I mean, they're not that hard, but really annoying, and there's not much fun to be had from this encounter. But that about covers the main 8 star droids, which are really great Robot Master stand-ins. Not all of them were winners, Uranus being the prime example of how not to do the star droid bosses, but I had fun fighting them, and I like that there were multiple ways to fight them. But how do the larger-than-life Fortress bosses compare, as well as their leader Terra? First off, we have the Dark Moon boss that serves as a mid-game boss, kind of like Ballad Phase 1 in the previous game, and as you can see, they're basically a gray version of the Yellow Devil, and is by far my favorite iteration of this boss type in not just the classic series, but also the franchise. I'm not even kidding, even if that's not exactly brag-worthy, as the quality of the Devil-type boss fight has declined since Mega Man X5 and onwards. For one, because you can slide and their projectiles move slower than in one NES, they are significantly easier to slide under, but there's also the bouncing projectiles where the higher pieces tend to bounce into a downwards arc, but none of this feels arbitrary or annoying, and the battle is well paced for the most part, where it doesn't take forever for it to reveal its eye weakness. And I honestly like how Minakuchi Engineering has the Dark Moon reform off screen instead of trying to fit it into the same screen, which would have made this battle concept that originated from the NES outright bastardized. So it's a very good iteration of this boss type. It's a shame that after fighting the 8 star droids that Terra is really easy. I mean, sure, their homing laser is threatening, but when using the Deep Digger weapon that is his only weakness, it just makes short work of them. I mean, not only does it fail to match the intimidation levels that the in-game cutscenes built up to, but they also regress the difficulty curve established by the bosses before. A simple solution would have been to maybe fight Terra as the mid-game boss and then have this level feature 2 boss battles, one with a more powerful Terra, and phase 2 would be them summoning Dark Moon with their dying breath. That would make this fight more challenging and give a sense of finality to the Star Droid stages, but as it is, I'm just glad that I get a cool weapon out of it. And as for the returning 4 Mega Man killers, or 3 Mega Man killers plus Quint, they function just as they did in the previous games, more or less. Like Enker and Ballad Phase 1 feel identical to their previous boss battles, but with Enker, they feel a lot easier thanks to the Mega Arm, and the slide really does make dodging their jump attack a lot easier since you couldn't slide in the original Wily's Revenge. Punk definitely feels a lot less harder than they used to be, mainly because I found their deadly spinning attack to be much slower than it was in Mega Man 3, allowing me to actually either jump over them or slide underneath, depending on whether they're spinning in the air or ground. So yeah, somehow by slightly modifying a boss or recreating it, bosses like Enker and Punk are more enjoyable than they were before. Ballad is about the same as his Phase 1 appearance, but as for Quint, oh boy. The only Mega Man killer or killer-like robot that managed to escape alive, I have some unfinished business with him. Unfortunately, he still sucks more than a prison vacuum. He really should have had his attack modified. I mean, I get wanting to pay tribute to the Mega Man World series up to this point, including the most infamous entry, but why couldn't they have it where the rocks would spit out all over the room? That'd make him a much better fight than he was in Mega Man 2 Game Boy. You would think that a future Mega Man that was reprogrammed to do Wily's bidding would, I don't know, actually put up a fight? I know that a lot more jaded future Mega Man would do all in his power to survive, not just hop around in a pathetic pogo stick, or maybe he just wants to die by temporal suicide and have his younger self finish the job. No, that's probably why Dr. Light made Mega Man X instead of just upgrading regular Mega Man. Because the original disappeared from the future, he had to make a new Guardian to protect humanity. So with that said, that's pretty much a case closed for whatever happened to the original classic Mega Man. So, Internet theorists, you can all thank me. Thank your Lord and Savior, Alec of the SKG Review Show. I just solved your mystery. But yeah, he pretty much finishes the job, and unlike last time, he actually explodes when defeated, and that's the end of the Quint legacy. Until he's brought up again in Mega Man and Base Challenger from the future for the WonderSwan handheld system. And I promise you that is the last time I will mention Mega Man and Base for the WonderSwan.
Well, thank God.
At least until I review it, because you know I'm going to review it someday. And this very last stage has not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 boss battle phases. The first 2 are metallic fists that try to side hover and home in on your location, but they're not too hard to slide and dodge when they're about to strike. The first one is easier and the second one is faster and even adds in a homing missile for good measure, but these are just warm-up phases because the third phase is by far the most creative boss in the game, and probably my personal favorite because it has a variety of things to do, like have the gravity pull you up towards the non-instant kill spikes, unless you shoot this enemy controlling it, but I just love how the machine spits out these walking and jumping bombs that have a countdown that vary from 1, 3, and 7 seconds, and you have to shoot it near the machine so it detonates and damages it, instead of you being near it. Like, that is so cool. I actually look forward to this part of the boss battle for that reason, and even though Phase 4 is more of a finish him kind of boss phase to reward the player for their resilience, this is Dr. Wily failing, but him just being in denial is just using what's left of his mech to shoot sparks out of it and attack Mega Man with them. Like, this is a new level of petty, and I find that freaking hilarious. And as for the real final boss battle, being Sunstar, they're pretty tricky at first, but underwhelming when you know what to do. I mean, I like the spectacle of the fight where Sunstar is set up to be a doomsday weapon, and you see them burning the platform you two were standing on, shooting out lasers, and even doing a spinning attack. This is honestly what Terra should have been like, and I don't see why Wily couldn't have upgraded Terra to become this very boss. I guess they want a secret weapon revelation instead of just Ballad 2.0. Regardless, the battle itself is flawed as hell. For one, it's tricky to avoid that long laser attack they do, and while in the second half of the fight you can anticipate and jump or slide over and under their spinning attack, it's still really easy, yet like a war of attrition at the same time. It's like you either take damage quickly or they do, and with the Spark Chaser weapon, this battle will be over within no time. I know classic Mega Man has always had a history of either underwhelming or overwhelming final boss battles, with rarely anything in between, and this is no exception. So not all the bosses are hits, but most of them range from decent to pretty good, and there's even a few that are pretty great, if I do say so myself. I really like that most of them can be fair fights with the Mega Arm weapon and with their weaknesses. It just makes this game a lot more accessible for a new player and returning players as well. It'll only make this game more replayable as players try to figure out which level they want to tackle first and which weapons they want first. One thing I really appreciate about this game that actually does better than any of the other classic entries before and after is how it takes the weapon acquiring screen to the next level. I mean, I do like the animations of Mega Man getting all excited for his weapon, and then it tells you what weapon you got in addition to anything extra like rush abilities, but that screen in 5 Game Boy after defeating a Star Droid will not only tell you what weapon you got, but also how to use it with real-time enemies being used as an example. Like in a few other classic series games, several times I found out later that I didn't use a weapon to its full potential. Like, how was I supposed to know Heat Man's weapon can be charged? Well, I didn't run into that problem here, and I wish more classic series actually showed demonstrations of these weapons like 5 Game Boy did. I know Mega Man's 9 and 10 followed a similar idea, but not necessarily with enemies. It's just Mega Man using his weapons in a blue background, which I suppose is good enough, but there's no doubt 5 Game Boy has the best screen transitions. Anyways, to narrow down what my all-time favorite weapon is in 5 Game Boy, I really like the Grab Buster and the Black Hole Bomb the most. Like, the Grab Buster can fulfill any wannabe vampire's needs, like sucking the life energy from your enemies and refilling your own health.
That's not the only thing he knows how to suck.
Oh my god. Really, Alton? Like, they're small health upgrades, but whenever I was in a bind with low health, I just used a Grab Buster instead of an E-Tank on incoming enemies and turned the tables on them. It's not overpowered though, since the health you get is the equivalent of those small health refill items, so despite having a low energy consumption rate, it's not going to rip an enemy to shreds since its defensive capabilities are nerfed in exchange for the health benefit. And the Black Hole Bomb is freaking awesome. Like, it can suck smaller enemies into it and then it'll detonate into 4 diverging clockwise moving spheres that can damage the surrounding enemies. It can even suck in enemy projectiles if you time it just right, and it's just so much fun to use as a result. Sure, it is an energy hog, meaning you can only use it like 5 times before it runs out, but that's an appropriate nerf for a powerful weapon like this. The electric shock is quite powerful as well, like it'll rip an enemy to shreds because of the duration of the electricity, but the thing is, you can't move while using it, making it only effective against either stationary targets or ones that stop moving, but sometimes it can be pretty easy to be a sitting duck to an incoming enemy that threatens touch damage. And the photon missiles are quite fun to use in many circumstances. They are weaker as an offensive weapon, but because the rate of fire is moderate and the energy consumption is low, it just works quite well in many combat scenarios, like taking out an enemy from afar, or just waiting for a jumping boss or enemy to land on them, since they stay in one place for a second before launching in one direction. And while the Break Dash and Deep Digger are weapons more geared towards accessing secret routes, since Deep Digger allows you to pick up rocks like Gutsman's weapon from Mega Man 1, and Break Dash allows you to break these cracked walls. The Break Dash I can see serving very well as a weapon against enemies in the way, since your whole hitbox is a weapon for a few seconds, making it so much better than a charge kick from Mega Man 5 NES in every conceivable way. Although, because the Deep Digger allows you to pick up rocks, this weapon's combat scenarios are just limited to those few areas in the game that have rocks, which is unfortunately not that many, making it one of my lesser favorite weapons in the game. But it's not my least favorite, no. My least favorite weapons has to be either the Salt Water or the Bubble Bomb. I mean, the Bubble Bomb is great for the 2 boss battles I did use it on, since they have a larger hitbox, but because it zigs and zags and explodes when something contacts it, relying on it to take out the smaller airborne enemies is a bit pointless, since you might as well just use the better weapons against it, like the Black Hole Bomb. Not to mention, if you miss the enemy with the zigzagging of the Bubble Bomb, you have to wait for it to blow up before being able to shoot out another one. That can be a real pain in the ass sometimes, and it's just more trouble than it's worth if I'm being honest. And Salt Water. It's cool that it takes out mines in Mars's level, and is the weakness of a few bosses, but using it against the level enemies, it just pales in comparison to the rest of the weapons. It either hits as one big drop, or hits the floor and divides the 3 weaker droplets, but either way, it's still kind of a very underwhelming weapon that could have had more utilitarian value. But that's not all, because there is a 9th weapon from the 9th Star Droid, and it is overpowered as hell. I love it, but it's overpowered. Remember the MCU film Guardians of the Galaxy, which depending on your taste in films, you either love it or find it to be overhyped? I personally fall into the latter category for Volume 1, but I did love Volume 2 for what it's worth. Anyways, remember that blue alien played by that actor who played Merle from The Walking Dead? Michael Rooker, that's his name. And his character's name was Yondu, I believe. He had this cool floating arrow that just killed armies at his command. Well, that is basically what Terra's weapon, the Spark Chaser, is. It just tracks down a nearby enemy and shoots through them again and again and again and again. Although unlike Yondu's arrow, it disappears after a few seconds, but this just makes short work out of the bosses I used it on, and because energy consumption is moderate and not high, you can use it several times to your liking, and that is why it's pretty overpowered. I do like that this is an endgame only weapon because it would just break the rest of the game if I use it in the early levels. It's not the most thoughtfully balanced weapon, but sure can be fun to use. Well, let's not forget the most precious addition to Mega Man 5 Game Boy, and his name is Tango, and he's a robot kitty! Oh my god, he's so adorable! First off, Dr. Light gives you Tango the cat right at the start, and as soon as you equip him, hold the B button, and he integrates into the level, and as soon as he integrates into the level, you hear an 8-bit like, oh my god, that's so freaking adorable! I'm not a crazy cat person, what are you talking about? Oh crap, it's that time of the week again. I'll be right back. Oh, man, he really did a number on that box. Scoop time. But yeah, Tango is just as useful as he is adorable. When summoning him, he rolls around the level space and rips enemies to shreds. Now I did hear reviewers of this game call him useless, and I can kind of see where they're coming from, because there are occasions when Tango takes his sweet ass time to home in on the enemy, or just rolls into a pit and disappears off screen like the cat he is. But honestly, I found the opposite to be true. He's a bit overpowered since he's like Beat the Bird with Earthbound limitations, but I can use him against any enemy regardless of their defenses, and Tango can just rip them to shreds effortlessly, and he doesn't consume that much energy since his weapon energy only depletes for as long as he's on screen, just like with Rush Jet. He's pretty useful, but a bit too useful. When he wants to cooperate, of course. It's a shame he doesn't show up in later games, except for Mega Man and Base for the Wonder Swan. Oh crap, I promised I wouldn't mention that game again, but you can use him in that game. And he also makes a cameo in Mega Man 10 in Proto Man Shop right next to a black market dealer that looks very suspiciously like Otto. Yeah, I'm a simple man. If I see a cat in a game, I want it in every single game, regardless of utilitarian value. Do not worry, dog lovers. Rush Coil and Rush Jet are acquired in the game as well, depending on which boss you defeat, and he functions as he did in the previous 2 games, although I rarely found the need to use Rush Jet. And Rush Coil, it just gets me to higher places, so no complaints here. Well, except for this one section in Uranus's level where it's impossible for him to integrate for some reason. Come on, Rush, reintegrate! Reintegrate! What was that? Come on! You're worse than my real dog. You know what? Forget about it. It's not worth it. And overall, despite a few duds, this arsenal of weaponry really hits home with me because while there are a few weapons that are overpowered, at least 8 out of 10 of these weapons have a purpose outside of boss battles and situational uses, and their usefulness is amplified if you do a certain side quest. Once again, the world needs a specific type of hero.
Are you gonna get to the crystals or what? I don't have all day.
Alright, we won't do the same old song and dance. Here are the crystals from Mega Man 5 Game Boy. In the second half of the game, there's a crystal in each of the 4 planets, and if you collect all 4 of them, your weapon energy consumption would be halved. I like that it's an optional side quest and the game is very playable without the upgrade should you choose to skip it, but the problem is, when you get to Uranus or Pluto's level crystal, you definitely need the other's weapon in order to have access to the area it's hiding in, meaning it's impossible to do a clean sweep of the 4 levels. I know these levels can be beaten in a few minutes, but it's still a minor case of backtracking that I can definitely see annoying some people. Mega Man 6 did the beat letter side quest perfectly where an optimal order is required to do a clean sweep. Why couldn't 5 Game Boy follow this example? I mean, replaying one level isn't the end of the world, and backtracking isn't even a glaring flaw that will plague this game, because while it is a minor flaw, it is optional, and the reward for this side quest is a very awesome reward for the final stages ahead. Like, being able to use the black hole bomb more times than before is just awesome. But after getting the crystals, be sure to go to Dr. Light's lab immediately and trade in the crystals for this energy upgrade, because my dumbass forgot to do that on my first 2 playthroughs and I just assumed it would happen automatically. But if you do go through the trouble of finishing that side quest, being brought to Dr. Light's lab and triggering a condition-specific dialogue box akin to
"Wait, look, Mega Man. I will now upgrade your weapons using these energy crystals."
that would have been preferable. So after a fun journey exploring these levels for these crystals, the reward for doing so is pretty sweet, and despite the one rocky bump in the road, but hey, this side quest is totally worth it. So, that about covers the gameplay of Mega Man 5 Game Boy, and it's safe to say Minakuchi Engineering has come a long way in such a short amount of time. While not perfect, I mean no game is, not only is this game great for being completely new and original with no recycled content in sight, except for the core aspects that should stay, like the slide ability, and of course repackaging familiar level design ideas from time to time like the conveyor belts, the level design perfectly complements Mega Man's abilities and gives the player an engaging time all around. And the game looks and sounds just as good. Like visually, it's 8-bit Mega Man in black and white, but the background detail for the sci-fi and space motifs are quite nice to look at as well, whether it be dilapidated ruins, a metallic interior, outer space, a rocky underground, or even Dr. Light's lab. Everything fits the style of classic Mega Man while representing the settings quite well, and the sprite work is really good, especially the designs of the star droids. Just take a look at Saturn or Mars. There's a lot going on with their design, with Saturn having a ring wrapped around him, or Mars's armor and weaponry. Like, they're far from basic sprite designs akin to Iceman from Mega Man 1, and the enemy sprites are quite standard, going for more of a cartoonish style to account for the light-hearted nature of the classic Mega Man series. And don't think I forgot to mention Mega Man 5 Super Game Boy support. From what I've seen on YouTube when Mega Man 5 Game Boy was recorded off the Super Game Boy, and my second recorded playthrough with those options on, it basically colorizes Mega Man 5 in a very basic way akin to Donkey Kong Land. Like, sure, you get this cool border with Met Tools doing their thing, but it basically just amounts to one solid color per screen, with the exception of the Mega Man icon being a blue helmet with light skin, and the title screen having Mega Man and 5 in two separate colors, and the text box and cutscenes tend to have a different colored border. I suppose color is preferable to black and white for some people, and there are times it does promote an atmosphere in some instances where black and white couldn't, like the intro having the valley in a blue color scheme, and that same valley being orange in the ending, giving a sense of time having passed. Or when seeing the city blown up, the sky is in this apocalyptic red and orange, or when Wily is struck, his UFO turns red while the rest of the screen is in purple. But really, the colors don't do much for the levels themselves. Like, I wouldn't be less emotionally invested if it was in black and white, because it's just a solid color depending on the circumstances. Like, Neptune has a water theme, so of course they go with a blue color for the whole level. That's just about it. So while the graphics are good artistically speaking, the Super Game Boy's features will only slightly enhance the experience, not overhaul it. Same can be said for a lot of Game Boy games with the Super Game Boy bonuses. I know it's the system limitations, but in retrospect, it doesn't really impress me that much. And as for the soundtrack, I hear this is one of the more mixed aspects about the game, and I don't really know why. It's not the most Mega Man sounding Mega Man soundtrack, but overall this soundtrack is pretty fine, to even pretty good. I mean, the cutscene themes are alright compositions, nothing too complex or simple. It's in that middle ground just to establish peaceful times before the storm, and just go with whatever they feel like for Dr. Light's lab. It doesn't give off a sense of safety from the rest of the world now under enemy control, but rather that Dr. Light's lab is futuristic and electronic, you know, that kind of vibe. And I will say Jupiter and Saturn's stage themes are a bit underwhelming. I mean, the percussion and main melodies are fine, but the pacing of these two tracks just don't really suit a Mega Man game where the fate of the world is on Mega Man's hands. But the rest of the Star Droid level themes, they're not just good, they're really good. I mean, maybe it's because of the key they're arranged in, but the chiptunes for stages like Mars, Mercury, and Pluto convey a dramatic scenario, whereas I can take these tracks very seriously, and this is more of what I have in mind for ideal classic Mega Man compositions. And even more optimistic sounding pieces like Neptune's stages theme work with the pacing of the level. Now, there are pieces like Uranus and Venus that, while they are decent tracks in their own right, they don't really convey the action of classic Mega Man that well. Like, they feel like they belong in a game like Donkey Kong 94, which is a more slower paced puzzle-centric platformer. I definitely don't think less of it for being outliers in the soundtrack, but it is an observation I took notice of. And sometimes video game compositions can make or break the atmosphere of a level. It doesn't matter if it was in the 8-bit era or in the current generation. I also like how the soundtrack follows the standards established by previous game soundtracks, where the boss theme has to have some build up in the beginning and convey a malevolent sounding arrangement, something that just tells you you're about to fight the baddest of the bad guys. And while I didn't like the Star Droid boss theme at first because I was so used to the sound of the ones on the NES, I've definitely grown fond of it, even if it's not one of my favorites in the classic series. And I like that the final boss has his own unique battle theme, which is a very fast and very crazy composition, and that's by no means a bad thing given how crazy and fast this boss battle goes. This is an epic final battle theme, because this really sounds like a battle to the death in a gladiatorial arena. It's either you or them, and it's just so much fun to listen to. And when viewing the ending, just hearing that slower paced ending theme just brings this fantastic journey to a close. It's possible that I am more emotionally invested into it, with the outside context that this isn't just the end of this specific journey. This composition kind of conveys that this is Minakuchi Engineering's last Game Boy Mega Man game. It's kind of bittersweet, even though they will move on to other projects in the future, but it's just like Mega Man and Dr. Wily. Despite the long journey coming to an end, everyone just moves on, despite what looks like a finale. This track also does give off kind of a feeling of uncertainty, maybe for the future ahead. but one thing I am certain of is that I really like the soundtrack. It's not overall my favorite in the classic series, and I doubt it'll make my top 5 even for the classic series alone. But one thing for sure is that these tracks are consistently good with very few duds if any. Even the worst ones are not too shabby. But I may or may not prefer 3 Game Boy and 4 Game Boy soundtracks on the basis that they reuse the better tracks of each game they borrowed from. So with that said, it's safe to say that Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy series is what Mega Man 6 is to the NES series. It was a perfect little send-off to each respective series, and in this case, the developers worked really hard on multiple games in the shadow of Capcom. But despite the odds and a few flawed entries in the beginning, it really stuck the landing in the end, and I think they consolidated all their efforts to something very meaningful. It's great that they were able to conclude this series on a high note, and with that said, it goes without saying that Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy is in fact as great as the fans say it is. Having covered the Game Boy series, it's worth noting that this isn't over for Minakuchi Engineering. I mean, Capcom seemed to really put in a lot of faith into them, given how they kept them around for 3, 4, and 5 Game Boy, and that faith will even be extended to bigger, more important projects like remaking 1 through 3 NES for Sega Mega Drive's Mega Man The Wily Wars compilation and 16-bit Glory, and they also co-designed portions of Mega Man X3, which you will either praise them or scorn them for, depending on how you view X3 as a game. It's a shame that they were only active until the early 2000s, but being the third most prolific Mega Man developer after Inti Creates, and of course in-house Capcom, it's not a reputation that just any developer can claim. I mean, it's no secret that they stumbled at first, but the quality just got significantly better with each installment after 2 Game Boy, finishing off strong with what I consider to be my second favorite classic Mega Man game as of writing. It's subject to change in the future, as I have many other classic Mega Man games to visit, and that's just a point I wanted to drive home when making this handheld retrospective. These games are really the case of same name, different game. Just because the first 4 installments borrow many elements from their NES counterparts doesn't necessarily mean they're just watered down ports. But looking at these games individually, I'm frankly surprised that at the end of the day, I can only really recommend 3, 4, and 5 as potential good times, because even though 3 is probably the least original, it's still a lot more enjoyable game than the flawed first 2 entries on the Game Boy. But I don't even regret playing the first 2 just to see how I really felt about them. Wily's Revenge may be frustrating at the end, and 2 can be pathetically easy. I still can't really call either of those games bad because they still have the merits of a Mega Man game that sets it apart from other platformer series, making them at worst an average experience. I do wish there was a legacy collection with the Game Boy games, but maybe that caused some licensing issues due to Game Boy emulation. Although I doubt Nintendo would care as long as they got a Switch port, or maybe Capcom doesn't see it as a probable sale, as most would only want the collection for 5. There was originally going to be an anniversary collection for the Game Boy Advance, which would have the 5 Game Boy games in full color, but sadly, that project was cancelled. And just looking at screenshots just makes me disappointed because while it's not the best coloring job I've seen, it still brings these games to life more than the Super Game Boy did for Mega Man 5. But some things just aren't meant to be, I guess. Regardless, all 5 Game Boy games can be found on the 3DS eShop, and if you're interested, I hope you enjoyed the Rockman World side series as much as I did. And for the lack of a better word, 5 is the perfect send-off to the Game Boy series. And that is a wrap on the Game Boy side series. This project took a long time to make, a bit too long admittedly, and that's all my fault. Thank you all so much for supporting this little retrospective up to this point. And until next video, remember to stay awesome, because the handheld retrospective isn't over yet. Professor, I've taken out the last of the opposing senators. Very good, Abel. And they're not able to trace it back to us. So, with that said, you will have your reward. Return to base immediately, and we will implant the new organs you requested. I know clone degradation can be a bit of a hassle to deal with. So, when are me and Psyquesticide going to go out on that special mission you've arranged for us? We are about to get ready for it real soon. Awesome. Now, I will have to brief you and Psyquesticide on this mission extensively, and no key parameter can be deviated from, otherwise the whole plan can go all wrong and hit rock bottom. So return to base as soon as possible.